Hey, everyone. Tonight, we're drifting back to a time of immense silk, towering wigs, and a truly staggering amount of toxic chemicals. We're heading to the 18th century, an era that looked like a dream, but, quite frankly, smelled like a nightmare. So, settle in, dim your lights, and pull up your blankets. There's no rush tonight. We're just going to wander through the dressing rooms of the past, where the pursuit of beauty was quite literally a slow-motion disaster. Now, if you were a noblewoman in the 1700s, your morning didn't start with a quick splash of water. In fact, water was considered a bit of a nuisance and potentially dangerous. No, your day began with the application of the mask. You see, the goal of the 18th century elite was to look as much like a piece of unpainted porcelain as humanly possible. To be tan was to be a peasant. To be pale was to be divine. And to achieve that divinity, they turned to a lovely little substance called Ceruse. Ceruse was essentially white lead mixed with vinegar. It was thick, it was opaque, and because it was lead, it was slowly destroying the skin it was meant to beautify. You'd apply it to your face, your neck, and your chest until you were a smooth, ghostly white. Of course, the lead would eventually cause your skin to shrivel and turn a lovely shade of grayish blue. But the solution to that wasn't to stop using the lead. Naturally, it was to apply even more lead to cover the damage. It was a cycle of cosmetic despair, and everyone was invited. Once you had your base layer of poison on, you needed a bit of color. After all, looking like a corpse isn't quite the same as looking like a healthy aristocrat. This is where we bring in the vermilion. Vermilion is a bright, beautiful red pigment. It is also made of cinnabar, which is more commonly known as mercury sulfide. So, after you'd finished coating your pores in lead, you would daintily pat some mercury onto your cheeks and lips. If you started to feel a bit shaky, or if your teeth began to loosen and fall out, you'd simply assume it was a touch of the vapors. You'd certainly never blame your rouge. It was a time when beauty was quite literally skin deep, and beneath that skin, things were getting rather complicated. But we can't talk about the face without talking about the hair, or rather, the architecture that lived on top of the head. As the century progressed, hair didn't just grow, it ascended. We're talking about the pouf. These were massive structures made of wire frames, wool padding, and pomade. Now, pomade was essentially a mix of lard and scented oils. You'd smear this animal fat through your hair to make the powder stick. The powder itself was usually flour or starch. So, if you're keeping track at home, we have lead on the skin, mercury on the cheeks, and a thick paste of pig fat and flour on the head. This created a very specific problem. If you leave a mixture of fat and flour in a warm room for several weeks, because these hairstyles weren't washed, they were simply refreshed. You were essentially opening a luxury hotel for vermin. It wasn't uncommon for a lady to find that a family of mice had taken up residence in her hair during the night. To combat this, ladies would sleep with silver cages over their heads, or keep scratching sticks nearby, long, elegant rods made of ivory or gold, designed to reach deep into the hairstyle to itch the scalp without disturbing the master pie. If you had lost teeth, which, given the diet and the mercury, was almost a guarantee, your cheeks would naturally sink in. To fix this, you would tuck small balls of cork or wax into your mouth to puff your cheeks out. It made speaking nearly impossible and gave everyone a slightly muffled, bewildered expression, but it gave the face a youthful roundness. Because in the 1700s, looking healthy was far more important than actually being healthy. Let's drift over to the next royal fiasco, where the beauty wasn't just skin deep, it was a matter of state survival. We're moving from the dressing room to the throne room to look at a family that took the concept of keeping it in the family to its absolute crumbling limit. The Habsburgs, specifically the Spanish branch. When we think of the Habsburgs, we usually think of the jaw. It's a legendary piece of anatomy, but it wasn't just a quirk, it was a biological countdown. Let's talk about Mariana of Austria. Mariana was a woman who was born into a web of family ties, so tangled, it's a wonder anyone could find their way to the dinner table. In 1649, she married her uncle, Philip IV of Spain. Now, in the logic of the time, this was a brilliant move. It kept the land together. It kept the blood pure. It also meant that Mariana's family tree didn't so much branch out as it did form a very tight, very stressed circle. Mariana was young, vibrant, and unfortunately, tasked with saving a dynasty that was already gasping for air. Her life was a series of rigid protocols. The Spanish court was famous for its etiquette, which was essentially a way to ensure that no one ever had any fun, ever. You couldn't laugh in public. You couldn't be touched. There's a famous story, perhaps apocryphal, but telling, that when a group of French dignitaries tried to give a Spanish queen a gift of silk stockings, they were rebuked because the Queen of Spain has no legs. She was a floating torso of dignity and lead makeup. Mariana's primary job of ECE, because heaven forbid we ruin the silhouette just because of a few lice. And then there were the plumpers. Course was to produce an heir, and she did. She gave the world Charles II. If the Habsburg Jaw was a spark, Charles was the explosion. He was a child who didn't speak until he was 4, didn't walk until he was 8, and whose jaw was so projected that his top and bottom teeth couldn't meet. He couldn't chew his food. He drooled constantly. But the court didn't see a biological disaster. They saw a miracle. He was the enchanted one. They believed his condition was the result of sorcery, not the fact that his ancestors have been marrying their cousins for 200 years. It's a very human trait, isn't it? To blame a ghost, or which rather than admit that your marriage policy is a bit of a mess. While Charles struggled to exist, the women of the court had to navigate the fallout. Mariana spent her years as queen regent, trying to hold together an empire while her son played with dolls in the corner of the palace. She was surrounded by advisors who were constantly plotting, and she had to do it all while wearing those massive, heavy gowns that could weigh up to 40 pounds. Imagine trying to run a global empire while essentially wearing a small lead-line tent and having your face slowly eroded by your foundation. It's a testament to human endurance, or perhaps just a testament to how much people will suffer for a title. As the Spanish line flickered out, the rest of Europe wasn't doing much better. Let's move our gaze slightly to the east, to the French court, where things were a bit more theatrical. We often think of Louis XIV, the Sun King, as the pinnacle of majesty. He was the man who turned Versailles into a golden cage. But Louis had a very specific and very unfortunate problem. He was obsessed with his own health, which in the 17th and 18th centuries was the most dangerous thing you could be. Louis had a team of doctors who were convinced, said that the key to health was purging. This meant that the King of France spent a significant portion of his day either taking laxatives or being bled. His chief physician, a man named Guy Crescent Fagan, believed that all illness was caused by bad humors. By the time Louis was in his middle age, he had lost most of his teeth to his doctor's treatments. They actually managed to break his jaw during a routine tooth extraction and then decided the best way to heal the wound was to cauterize the roof of his mouth with a red-hot iron. Several times. And yet, Louis continued to host gargantuan banquets. He would sit at the head of a table, surrounded by the highest nobility of France, and gamely attempt to gum his way through 6 courses of pheasant, boar, and pastries. Because he was the Sun King, and the Sun King does not allow a missing jawbone to stop the party. The courtiers had to sit there, watching him, unable to eat until he did, and unable to leave until he was finished. It was a silent, polite, and deeply uncomfortable marathon of dental agony. While the king was suffering through dinner, the women of Versailles were engaged in a different kind of warfare. The War of the Mouche, or, as we know them, beauty marks. In the 18th century, a silk patch on the face wasn't just a way to hide a smallpox scar, though it was very good for that. It was a language. If you placed a heart-shaped patch on your right cheek, it meant you were married. On the left, you were engaged. A patch near the corner of the eye was the passionate one. One on the forehead was the majestic. It was a way to communicate without saying a word, which was helpful because, as we've established, between the plumpers in the mouth and the lead in the lungs, talking was becoming a bit of a chore. But beneath the silk patches and the powdered hair, life was incredibly fragile. We see these people in paintings, and they look so permanent, so solid. But they were living in a world where a scruff